The year was 1870, and the frontier town of Dry Creek looked much like it always had. Dust caked on the wooden boards, tin signs rattling in the wind, horses shifting restlessly at hitching posts. Men leaned on railings with their hats tilted low. Women bustled past with baskets in hand, and a game of poker dragged on the corner window of the saloon. Yet on this day, all motion slowed, as though time itself had drawn a sharp breath. A lone rider appeared at the far end of the street. The steady thump of hooves carried on the wind, each beat stirring the dust higher. Folks turned their heads, squinting against the sunlight. What they saw made them stiffen. It wasn't just a rancher, broad-shouldered, weather-worn, hat-brimmed, shadowing eyes that had seen too much of both war and sorrow. No, it was the two women riding just behind him. Their black hair gleamed like a raven's wing, braided and bound with leather cords. They wore deerskin dresses, stitched with careful hands, and each carried herself with the calm, upright dignity of someone who feared nothing in this world. Whispers darted faster than flies on spilled whiskey. He's brought savages into town. Apache wives? Lord help us. Lost his mind, that one. Children pointed. Some laughed, emboldened by the nervous chuckles of their parents. Others only stared wide-eyed at women whose presence shook the familiar order things. The rancher's jaw worked beneath his beard, but he kept his eyes straight ahead. If he heard the mocking, he gave no sign. He guided his horse steady as a river current, the women following without so much as a flicker of shame. Their silence seemed to trouble the town more than any outburst might have. At the saloon doors, two men pushed out, already drunk though the day wasn't halfway gone. "Well, I'll be," one slurred. "The fool's gone and fetch himself not one, but two red squaws." His friend spat tobacco into the dust. Guess he couldn't get a proper woman after Mary died. The rancher's hands flexed on the reins. Mary. The name was a wound that never healed, and the town knew it. He said nothing, but the silence pressed hard against his ribs. The sheriff stood on the boardwalk, arms folded. A decent man, worn thin by the job. He didn't join in the laughter, but neither did he stop it. His voice carried low when the rancher drew close. "You're stirring a fire you won't be able to put out, Eli. Folks don't take kindly to this." Eli, the rancher, met his eyes at last. They don't have to take kindly. They only have to leave us be. But even as he spoke, Eli knew the words were too thin to hold back what was coming. He let his wives past, the jeers following like crows above a grave. The ranch lay a few miles out, a stretch of land scarred by drought, and yet stubbornly clinging to life. Fences leaned where storms had beaten them. Cattle wandered lean along the creek bed, and the small house sat weather-beaten but sturdy. It was no place of grandeur, but it was his, bought with sweat and blood. As the horses cooled, Eli's mind wandered unbidden into the past, into a life cracked open by loss. He saw Mary again, her pale face in candlelight, hair plastered to her brow as fever and childbirth claimed her. He'd held her hand, begged her to stay. But by dawn, he was a widower with an infant that never drew breath. The town had shown him pity at first, then distance, then suspicion when grief turned him quiet and hard. A man without laughter made others uneasy, and soon he found himself more ghost than neighbor. It was in that solitude he had stumbled half dead into Apache lands, a bullet tearing through his side after a skirmish with rustlers. He remembered collapsing under the mesquite trees, the hot sky whirling above him, and thinking death had finally come. But death didn't come. Two sisters did. They had found him, nursed him with herbs he couldn't name, held water to his lips when he couldn't raise his head. In time, when he walked again, he had worked alongside their people, cutting wood, tending fires, learning to listen instead of speaking. The sisters had stood close, their eyes sharp, their laughter rare but real. In their silence, he'd felt a comfort stronger than any sermon. In their presence, the wound of Mary had scabbed, then healed. When he asked them to be his wives, it was not with the arrogance of a conqueror, but the humility of a man who knew he had been saved. They had agreed, not out of desperation, but out of choice. Together, they had built something resembling a life. Now, bringing them into town, he realized how fragile that life truly was. The preacher's words still rang in his ears. This marriage is against God's law. Eli had bitten back his reply then. He remembered too many funerals, too many coffins lowered into dry earth, to have much patience for a preacher's thunder. Still, the venom had sunk into the crowd, and Eli had seen in their eyes a hunger for trouble. The women had stayed silent through it all. He wondered if their silence was strength or restraint, or both. As the sun sank and the house filled with the smell of beans simmering, one of them finally touched his arm. "They will not stop," she said softly, her English accented but clear. But words are not always answered with steel. Sometimes they must be answered with truth. Her sister nodded, dark eyes steady. "We will not hide, husband, not any more." 2 nights later, Dry Creek gathered at the saloon for its usual rhythm of cards, whiskey, and suspicion. But this time the air held an extra weight, thick as storm clouds pressing low. Word had spread. The preacher planned to speak, to call out Eli in front of every soul who would listen. Eli knew it when he rode into town. The way men leaned close, the way women herded their children inside. His wives rode with him, and though his gut burned with dread, he did not ask them to stay behind. They sat straight-backed, unflinching, as though daring the town to meet their eyes. Inside the saloon, the preacher stood tall, Bible in hand, face red with righteousness. He wasted no time. "Neighbors, we are gathered here not for drink nor cards, but for the soul of this community. A man among us has defiled the law of God and the decency of white civilization. He parades heathen women in our streets, calls them wives, and expects us to bless his shame." Applause and jeers rose, a mixture of approval and venom. Eli stood just inside the door, fists tight at his sides. He could take the insults, he could take the whispers, but not against them, not against the women who had saved him, who had stood by him. His mouth opened, words rising hot in his throat. But before he spoke, one of the women stepped forward. The saloon froze. Boots scraped, glasses lowered, dice stopped mid-roll. The preacher's mouth hung open. The room was a held breath. And then, clear as a bell in the hush, she spoke. "You speak of shame," she said, her voice calm, perfect English shaping each word. "But you do not know us." "Not yet." Her sister came beside her, her gaze sweeping the crowd. "You mock silence. You mock what you do not understand. But tonight you will hear us." The saloon that had moments before roared with laughter now sat stunned, as if walls themselves leaned closer to catch every word. Eli felt his chest tighten, his throat too thick to swallow. He had prepared himself to fight with fists, with guns if need be. He had never imagined a fight would begin with words. Words sharp enough to cut through every jeer, every sneer, every cruel whisper. The preacher faltered, his hand trembling on the Bible. Men shifted uncomfortably. Women pressed closer to hear. Eli's wives stood side by side, their silence broken at last, their truth rising like thunder on the horizon. And in that moment, the town of Dry Creek, for the first time, fell completely silent. The preacher's face drained of color as the woman's words rang through the saloon. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Dice lay untouched. Whiskey glasses hung halfway to lips. The silence was so sharp, Eli could hear the creak of the swinging sign outside. His wife, dark eyes steady, voice cutting clear, did not waver. "You speak of shame," she said again, louder now. "But you do not know us. You do not know what we carry, what we have lost." Her sister stepped to her side. Together, they stood tall, not as silent ornaments, not as squaws for a man's possession, but as women with stories, voices, and fire. "I was taught your language," the second wife said, her accent faint, her words precise. "I read your books. I learned your prayers. Do not call me ignorant. Do not call me less." A murmur rippled through the crowd. A card player swore under his breath. A woman at the back clutched her child closer. Eli watched the men who had mocked him, the miners with their crooked grins and cruel laughter. Their grins had soured. Their eyes narrowed, not in amusement now, but in anger. Words, it turned out, cut deeper than silence ever had. The preacher slammed his Bible shut. "The devil is clever with his tongue. Do not be deceived," he thundered. But thunder could not drown fire. The first wife pointed at him, her voice sharp as a blade. You preach love, yet you spit hatred. Your God speaks of mercy. Where is it in your heart? The room stirred, half shamed, half enraged. A miner hurled a bottle that smashed against the wall inches from Eli's head. Glass rained across the floor. Shouts broke loose. A tongue don't change blood. Savages dressed up in words. Eli stepped forward at last, his hand hovering near the Colt at his hip. Enough. But his wives had already changed the course of the night. Their words lingered, heavy as judgment, impossible to unhear. They left the saloon under the sheriff's watchful eye, his palm resting on his holster as he guided them through the restless crowd. Every eye followed. Some glared, some looked away, some burned with curiosity that edged toward respect. Back at the ranch, the prairie wind whistled through dry grass. Coyotes yipped far off. The women moved with ease, tending to the fire, setting supper, speaking little. But Eli knew the silence tonight was different. Not restraint, not submission. Resolve. You should not have spoken, he muttered at last, voice low, heavy with worry. One of them looked up, the firelight dancing in her eyes. And let them spit and jeer forever? No, we have voices, husband. Tonight they learned it. Her sister nodded, stirring the pot. Words may not stop bullets, but they can strike deeper. Some men will remember. Eli had no answer. He only sat, staring into the flames, knowing they had stepped onto a path with no return. That night, the first torch appeared at the edge of the ranch. Then another, then 6 more, flickering like angry stars against the dark. Eli heard the hoofbeats, the drunken shouts. He rose from his chair, shotgun in hand, heart pounding like war drums. Come out, Eli, a voice slurred. Send the squaws out. We'll show you what to do with them. The wives appeared beside him, rifles already in their hands. Their calm steadiness chilled him, like they had always known this night would come. Gunfire cracked. A bullet splintered the window frame. Another tore a hole through the door. The cattle bawled in panic, hoofs thundering against the corral fence. Eli returned fire, dropping a torch into the dust. The women moved with practiced grace. One fired from the window, shattering a rider's lantern and throwing him from his horse. The other dragged the youngest hired hand, a boy who had come to sleep in the loft, out of the line of fire and pressed a pistol into his shaking hands. The raiders circled, yelling curses, flames painting their faces with savage light. We'll burn you out, one bellowed. A torch sailed through the air, crashing against the barn wall. Flames licked dry boards. Smoke curled into the night. Eli's blood roared. He dashed out, blasting with his shotgun, nearly cut down before one of his wives dropped the man who had raised his rifle behind him. They fought not as husband and wives, not as man protecting helpless women, but as 3 souls bound together, holding the line with steel and fire. The barn burned. Horses screamed. The raiders regrouped, voices rising in ugly chants. Then, in the midst of it all, one wife stepped onto the porch. No weapon in hand, only her voice. Enough, she shouted, perfect English rolling like thunder. The gunfire faltered. The chanting stilled. For one terrible, charged moment, even the flames seemed to pause. Her figure blazed in the firelight, shadows stretching long behind her. She lifted her chin, her dark hair loose from its braid, her eyes burning brighter than the torches. You call us savages, she cried. Yet it is you who come in the night, who burn homes, who spill blood for hatred. Her sister stepped beside her, rifle still steady in her hands. We have given you no harm. We have taken no land. We built with our own hands, and still you spit on us. Tell me, who is savage here? The men shifted uneasily, faces flickering between shame and stubborn rage. A few lowered their torches. Others muttered. But there were those whose eyes gleamed only hotter, drunk on malice. One spurred his horse forward, pistol raised. Words don't scare me, he snarled. Eli leveled his shotgun. His wives stood their ground, unflinching. The man's horse balked, reared, throwing him to the dust. Laughter rippled from the back of the crowd, nervous, but enough to break the fever pitch. The sheriff's voice rang out then, sharp and hard. That's enough. He rode in with 2 deputies, pistols drawn. I'll put a bullet in the next man who raises a hand. The mob broke, grumbling, cursing, scattering into the night. Torches snuffed one by one. Hooves thundered away. The prairie fell silent but for the crackle of the burning barn. Eli's arms trembled with fury and exhaustion. Smoke stung his throat. He turned to his wives, ready to scold them for standing exposed before armed men. But when he met their eyes, words died in his mouth. There was no fear there, only strength. They had stood taller than him tonight. They had faced hatred with more than bullets. They had faced it with truth. The sheriff dismounted, shaking his head. They'll be back, Eli. Not tonight, but soon. I can't hold a whole town together forever. Eli nodded, the weight heavy on his shoulders. He looked at his wives, silhouetted against fire and smoke, and knew the fight had only just begun. But one thing was certain. The town of Dry Creek would never forget the night silence broke, the night two Apache women stood before a mob and held it with nothing more than their voices. And for the first time, Eli wondered if the war ahead would not be won by guns at all, but by words that cut deeper than steel. Smoke still curled into the night sky when the last hoofbeats faded. Eli stood amid ruin. The barn blackened, its roof sagging into smoldering ash. The smell of charred timber thick in the air. The cattle had scattered. The corral lay broken. The boy they'd saved huddled by the porch, wide-eyed, clutching the pistol like it was part of his arm. Eli dropped his shotgun to the dirt, the weight in his chest heavier than the gun. He looked at his wives, their faces cut sharp by firelight, hair loose, dresses singed at the hem. They were tired, but not defeated. He realized then that he had fought to survive the night, but they had fought to prove something larger. The sheriff's warning echoed in his ears. They'll be back. And they were. At dawn, the horizon glowed with the heat of approaching riders. Dust rose in a thick cloud. More men this time, miners, ranch hands, drunkards, and those hungry for a fight. Some carried rifles, some torches. The preacher rode at the front, Bible held high like a battle standard. Eli's gut turned. He counted near 30. Too many. The women stood on the porch, rifles in hand. But then, as the mob drew closer, the elder wife stepped down from the porch. She let her rifle hang loose at her side, raising her voice so it carried over the prairie wind. "You call yourselves righteous," she shouted, her English sharp, the words ringing like iron against stone. "You ride to burn, to kill, to break what is not yours. Is that your God's way?" The riders slowed. Some pulled their horses short. Uneasy, the preacher's voice bellowed back. "Do not listen. The devil speaks in tongues. Their words are poison." The second wife stepped forward now, her own rifle still cradled but her voice steady. "We have lost fathers, brothers, land, and homes. Yet we stand here not to take from you, but to live in peace. Who is savage? The one who builds or the one who burns?" The mob wavered. Faces hardened, then softened. Shame flickered in some eyes. Others snarled, gripping their rifles tighter. Eli's heart hammered. He saw in that moment the divide. Men who could be swayed, and men who wanted blood no matter the cost. The preacher lifted his Bible again. Enough words. Fire cleanses sin. He spurred his horse forward, and behind him, the hard-eyed ones followed. Gunfire split the air. Eli dug for his shotgun, firing from the porch. A rider fell, tumbling in the dust. His wives fired with unerring aim, each shot measured, precise. Bullets whined past their heads, splitting wood, shattering windows. The preacher charged through the chaos, his Bible now forgotten, a pistol in his hand. His voice shrieked over the din and this abomination. One wife dropped a rider from his saddle. Another man reeled back, hand bleeding where a bullet had shot the pistol clean away. But more came, pressing harder. Eli's arm burned where a bullet grazed him. He staggered, breath short, smoke choking his throat. Yet through the blur of gunfire, he saw it. His wives standing tall, reloading with calm precision, their eyes lit not with fear, but with fury and resolve. The preacher aimed straight for Eli. But before Eli could raise his shotgun, the elder wife stepped between them. Her rifle roared. The preacher's horse screamed, rear high, and the man toppled backward into the dust. His pistol flew wide, clattering across the dirt. The mob froze as he lay there, groaning, the holy book crushed beneath him, its pages torn and scattered on the ground. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the elder wife's voice rang out again. "This is the truth. We will not bow, we will not break, and we will not leave." The second wife raised her voice to match, sweeping the crowd with her gaze. "If you call yourselves men of honor, then act it now. End this." The sheriff, who had ridden hard to catch up, pushed his horse between them all, his pistol raised. His voice thundered, "This fight is over. By law, by blood, by God himself, this land is his, and these women are under my protection." Silence spread, heavy as thunder before the storm breaks. Then, one by one, the riders peeled back, some ashamed, some bitter, some shaken to their core. The preacher lay moaning in the dust, his followers scattering like smoke and wind. Eli lowered his shotgun, chest heaving. His wives lowered their rifles, their faces calm, but their eyes glistening with fire that could not be quenched. The mob had come to destroy them. Instead, they had been silenced, by words and by truth as much as by bullets. The prairie was quiet now. Smoke rose in thin tendrils from the wreck barn. The sun lifted, painting the land in gold, the light cutting across tired faces and broken fences. Eli sat on the porch steps, blood seeping through the sleeve of his shirt. His wives tended him, steady hands binding the wound. He winced, but the pain seemed far away. His mind was still in the storm of what had passed. For years, he had carried the weight of protecting them, believing he alone bore the strength to stand between them and the cruelty of the world. But last night, and again this morning, they had shown him otherwise. They had stood taller than he, with voices strong enough to still a mob. He looked at them now, their faces lined with soot, their hair unbound, their eyes steady. They were no longer the silent shadows the town had mocked. They were pillars, unshakable, rooted deeper than the prairie grass itself. The sheriff approached, hat in his hands. He looked tired, older than he had the night before. "I can't speak for every man in this town," he said quietly. "But today they saw something they'll never forget. They may not all admit it, but respect has a way of sticking once it's planted." Eli nodded. His voice was low. "They silenced them. Not me. Them." The sheriff glanced at the women and gave a short nod of respect, then turned back to his deputies, barking orders to round up stragglers. As the sun climbed higher, townsfolk began to gather at the edge of the ranch, women with shawls over their heads, children clutching skirts, a few men with their hats in their hands. Not jeering this time, watching, hesitant, some even stepping forward to offer buckets of water, bandages, food. Eli's wives received them not with scorn, nor with smiles, but with quiet dignity. They accepted the offerings, meeting each gaze without flinching. And slowly, one by one, the townsfolk began to bow their heads, a wordless gesture of respect that carried more weight than any apology. That night, when the ranch was quiet again, Eli sat by the fire. The flames cast shadows that danced across the walls. His wives sat close, one leaning against his shoulder, the other stirring the embers with a stick. He spoke softly, more to himself than to them. "I thought I was the one holding this together. Thought I was the wall between you and the world. But maybe," he trailed off, the words catching. He swallowed, eyes on the fire. "Maybe I was the one who needed you to stand for me." Neither woman answered. They didn't need to. The warmth at his side, the strength in their silence, was enough. Outside, the prairie stretched endless and wild. The town beyond would remember what happened here. They might whisper, they might still judge, but they would not laugh. Not again. And somewhere deep inside, Eli knew the fight was not over. Prejudice did not die in a single night. But what had begun here, voices breaking silence, truth cutting deeper than hate, that would last. The narrator's voice lingers in the quiet. They mocked what they did not understand. They struck with fire, but were struck harder by truth. And maybe that is a lesson we take from this tale, that sometimes the strongest weapon on the frontier was not the gun on a man's hip, but the voice of a woman who refused to be silenced. The fire cracked, sparks rising into the dark. And so the story of Eli and his wives was carried not by rumor nor by jeers, but by the memory of a night when words stood taller than bullets,